The cream-colored envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb, its gold-embossed lettering catching the morning light. I'd been avoiding it for 3 days, but today the urgent text from my cousin Grayson forced me to acknowledge its existence. My name is Morgan, and that envelope represented everything I'd spent the last 5 years running from. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands as my phone buzzed again. "Just open the damn thing already," Sophie called from my living room couch, where she'd been pretending to work on her laptop for the past hour. "Your phone's going crazy, and I can practically hear your anxiety from here." I ripped open the envelope, pulling out a heavyweight card that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "You are cordially invited," I read aloud, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "to celebrate Vivian Mack's 55th birthday gala. Your mother never does anything small, does she?" Sophie closed her laptop and joined me in the kitchen. "Wait, there's a handwritten note." I pulled out a smaller card, immediately recognizing my mother's precise handwriting. "Your presence is required. Come learn your fate." Well, that's not ominous at all. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. "Grayson, I was just about to call you." "Did you open it?" His voice was tense. "Morgan, you need to be there. Trust me on this." I switched to speakerphone so Sophie could hear. "Why? So Mother can publicly shame me again?" Last time I showed up at one of her events, she spent 20 minutes telling her friends how disappointed she was that her only daughter chose to waste her life making finger paintings. "It's different this time," Grayson insisted. "Leighton called me yesterday. Something big is coming." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "The family lawyer? Now that's interesting." I walked to my studio window, looking out at the city below. My latest painting sat unfinished on its easel, defying the perfectly manicured world my mother inhabited. "What did Leighton say exactly?" "He wouldn't give details, but he mentioned your grandmother's letter. You know, the one she left you before she died." My heart skipped a beat. I crossed the room to my desk, pulling open the bottom drawer where I kept Grandma Elizabeth's letter. I'd read it so many times the paper was starting to wear at the creases. "Morgan," Sophie's voice was gentle. "What letter?" "My grandmother left me a letter 6 months ago, right before she died. It said," I paused, unfolding the paper. "It said that when the time came, I would need to be brave, that she'd left me something that would change everything, but I had to wait for the right moment. And you never mentioned this because," Sophie crossed her arms, "because it felt private, special." I traced my grandmother's signature with my finger. She was the only one who ever really understood me, who supported my art, my choices. She was everything my mother isn't. Grayson's voice crackled through the speaker. "The gala's in 3 days. Mother's going all out. Hired that ridiculous ballroom at the Grand Plaza, invited half the city's elite. Whatever she's planning, it's going to be big." Sophie grabbed her laptop again, typing furiously. "Just checked the guest list. I may have hacked into the event planner's database. There's over 300 people confirmed, including every major business contact your family has." "Perfect," I muttered. "A huge audience for whatever humiliation she has planned." Or, Sophie looked up, a mischievous glint in her eye. "The perfect opportunity to finally stand up to her. Your grandmother must have had a reason for leaving you that letter. Maybe this is the moment she was talking about." I read the invitation again, my mother's note sending a chill down my spine. "Come learn your fate." After years of trying to force me into her mold, the right schools, the right clothes, the right career path, was this her final power play? "I'll be there," I told Grayson, "but I'm doing this my way." After hanging up, I walked back to my painting. It was a portrait of my grandmother, her kind eyes seeming to watch me with that knowing look she always had. At her throat was the antique locket she never took off, the one she'd left me in her will, along with the letter. Sophie came to stand beside me. "What are you thinking?" I touched the real locket hanging around my neck, feeling its weight. "I'm thinking it's time to open this. Grandma said in her letter that when I needed answers, I'd find them here." "Well then," Sophie grinned, "let's see what secrets your grandmother left you." The locket's clasp was stiff, as if it hadn't been opened in years. As it finally clicked open, a tiny folded paper fell into my palm, and I knew with absolute certainty that my life was about to change forever. The Grand Plaza's ballroom sparkled like a crystal cave, but all that glitter couldn't mask the tension in the air. I smoothed down my emerald green dress, decidedly not the pastel pink my mother had suggested, and felt Sophie squeeze my arm reassuringly. "Ready for this?" she whispered. "As I'll ever be." I touched the locket at my throat, thinking of the document hidden in my clutch. The paper from inside it had changed everything, but timing would be crucial. Grayson appeared beside us, looking sharp in his tuxedo. "Heads up, Hurricane Vivienne incoming at 2 o'clock. My mother glided toward us, a vision in white silk and diamonds. Her smile was picture perfect, but her eyes were arctic when they landed on me. "Darling, you came, though I see you couldn't manage to wear the dress I sent over." "Mother," I kissed her cheek, feeling the stiffness in her posture. "Happy birthday." "Yes, well." She glanced at Sophie with barely concealed disdain. "I don't recall the invitation, including a +1. "Sophie's my date," I said firmly. "You did say to bring someone special." Before my mother could respond, Leighton approached with 2 champagne flutes. "Vivienne, you're needed by the stage. The governor just arrived." She plastered on her society smile. "We'll talk later, Morgan. Do try not to embarrass me tonight." As she walked away, Leighton pressed one of the champagne flutes into my hand. "Drink this. You'll need it." His eyes darted meaningfully to my clutch. "Is everything in place?" I nodded. "Sophie's got it covered." "Got what covered?" A familiar voice made me freeze. I turned to find Riker, my ex, standing there in an impeccably tailored suit. "Morgan, you look different." "Riker," I forced myself to breathe normally. "I didn't expect to see you here. Your mother invited me." His smile was sharp. "Said something about keeping family friends close." Sophie stepped between us. "Family friends who dated her daughter for 2 years, then dumped her after a suspicious meeting with said mother. Ancient history." Riker's eyes narrowed. "Though I'm curious why you're both looking so prepared for something." Grayson smoothly intervened. "Riker, I heard the senator's daughter asking about you earlier. She's by the fountain." As Riker walked away, I downed my champagne. "He knows something's up." "He suspects," Leighton corrected. "But he can't know. Nobody does except the 4 of us." He checked his watch. 20 minutes until your mother's speech. Are you sure about this?" The memory of the document's contents flashed through my mind. The proof of my mother's betrayal. Not just of me, but of everything my grandmother had built. "I'm sure." "Morgan!" A shrill voice cut through the crowd. My Aunt Patricia air-kissed my cheeks. "Darling, we've missed you at the country club. Your mother says you're still doing that art thing?" "Actually," I smiled sweetly, "I just sold 3 pieces to the Modern Art Museum." "Oh." Her face fell slightly. "How creative of you." As the minutes ticked by, more relatives and family friends approached, each interaction a carefully choreographed dance of passive-aggressive comments and fake smiles. I watched my mother work the room, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. Sophie's phone buzzed. "Everything's uploaded and ready," she whispered. "One text from me and it all goes live." Grayson touched my shoulder. Last chance to back out. I looked around the room. At the wealth, the pretense, the carefully maintained illusions. My grandmother's words from her letter echoed in my mind. "The truth will set us all free, even those who fear it most." "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers. "Please welcome our hostess, Vivienne Mack." My mother ascended the stage, radiant in the spotlight. The crowd applauded as she took the microphone, but I noticed Leighton positioning himself near the exit, phone in hand. "Thank you all for coming tonight," my mother began. "Family means everything to me, which is why I have an important announcement to make." I felt the weight of the locket against my skin, thinking of my grandmother's strength, her wisdom, her foresight in preparing for this moment. "Morgan, darling," my mother's voice turned saccharine. "Come join me on stage." Sophie squeezed my hand. "Show time." As I walked toward the stage, phone notifications began pinging throughout the room. I saw my mother's eyes flick to her phone on the podium, then widen in horror. The truth was already spreading, pixel by pixel, screen by screen. I took my place beside her, feeling stronger with each step. The spotlight was harsh, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I needed to be. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the microphone. "I have an announcement about the future of our family legacy," she said, unaware that her carefully planned script was about to shatter like fine crystal. "As you all know," my mother continued, her voice carrying across the now quieting ballroom, "legacy is everything. Our family has always stood for excellence, tradition, and—" She paused as more phones chimed. Her own screen lit up again, and I saw her jaw clench. "Is something wrong, Mother?" I asked innocently, loud enough for the microphone to catch. She shot me a warning look before plastering on her signature smile. "As I was saying, today I'm announcing some changes to our family's future. Morgan, my only daughter, has chosen a path that—" More notifications pinged throughout the room. Murmurs started rising from the crowd. "Oh my God," someone gasped. "Is this real?" "Have you seen these documents?" My mother's hand tightened on the microphone. "If I could have everyone's attention, please. These interruptions are quite rude." But the murmurs grew louder. I saw Riker staring at his phone, his face pale. Aunt Patricia was frantically whispering to her husband. The governor was already heading for the exit. "Mother," I said clearly into the microphone, "maybe you should check your phone. There seems to be some interesting news breaking." She glanced at her screen again, and this time the color drained from her face. This is obviously some sort of hack, a mistake." "No mistake." I pulled the original document from my clutch. "I have the proof right here. Grandmother's signature, your signature, dated 15 years ago. The real agreement about the company's ownership." The crowd had completely abandoned any pretense of listening to her speech. Phones were being passed around, shocked conversations erupting everywhere. She forged her own mother's signature. The overseas accounts, all those charities were fake. My mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "What have you done?" she hissed. I pulled away, speaking directly into the microphone. "Why don't you tell them, Mother? Tell them how you forged Grandma's signature to transfer company ownership to yourself. How you've been embezzling from the family foundation for years. You ungrateful little—" She reached for the document in my hand, but I stepped back. "Careful, Mother. Everyone's watching." Leighton stepped onto the stage, his presence commanding attention. "As the family's legal counsel, I can confirm these documents are authentic. Elizabeth left very specific instructions about their release." My mother's composure finally cracked. "You knew? You helped her with this betrayal." "Elizabeth knew everything," Leighton replied calmly. "She spent her last years gathering evidence, protecting her real legacy." He turned to address the crowd. "The full documentation has been sent to the relevant authorities and media outlets." "You can't do this," my mother snarled, grabbing the microphone again. "I built this empire. Morgan, you think you can humiliate me like this? Fine, let me make my announcement. As of today, you are officially cut off. No inheritance, no trust fund, nothing." I laughed, the sound echoing through the speakers. "Did you really think this was about money?" Sophie appeared at the edge of the stage, holding up her phone. "The story's trending. Major news outlets are picking it up." My mother lunged for Sophie's phone, but Grayson stepped between them. "Enough, Aunt Vivian. It's over." The ballroom had descended into chaos. Business partners were making hurried phone calls, society friends were practically running for the exits, and reporters were already gathering outside, alerted by Sophie's carefully timed press release. "Morgan," my mother's voice turned pleading, "we can fix this. Whatever you want, your art gallery, your own foundation, we can make it happen." I touched my grandmother's locket. You still don't understand. This isn't a negotiation. This is consequences. Riker approached the stage, his face twisted with anger. You told me Morgan was stealing from the company. That's why you wanted me to break up with her. She was protecting her lies, I told him, just like she's been doing her whole life. Security guards appeared at the ballroom entrance. Leighton nodded to them. They're here to secure the premises and any remaining documents, standard procedure in fraud cases. My mother's face hardened into a mask of fury. You'll regret this, all of you. She turned to the scattered crowd. This is a misunderstanding. My daughter is disturbed, she's always been jealous, but no one was listening anymore. Her carefully curated audience was deserting her, along with her carefully curated reality. I stepped away from the microphone, my part done. As security approached the stage, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. This wasn't just revenge, it was liberation. Morgan, Grayson called. The press wants a statement. I touched the locket one last time, thinking of my grandmother's words. The truth isn't always pretty, but it's always powerful. Taking a deep breath, I headed toward the ballroom doors, leaving my mother's crumbling empire behind. The real story was just beginning. Camera flashes exploded as I stepped into the hotel lobby. Sophie flanked my left side, Grayson my right, as reporters shouted questions from behind the security line. Miss Mack, can you confirm the allegations against your mother? What prompted you to come forward now? Is it true the fraud extends to international accounts? Before I could respond, Leighton appeared with two stern-looking individuals in suits. Ms. Morgan, these are Agents Carter and Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit. They need to speak with you immediately. We were escorted to a private conference room, away from the chaos. Through the glass walls, I could see my mother being led out by security, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears and rage. Miss Morgan, Agent Carter began, we've been investigating your mother's financial activities for months, but couldn't build a solid case without internal documentation. What you've provided changes everything. There's more, Grayson interrupted, pulling out his phone. Show her what you found, Morgan. I hesitated. Are you sure? This part wasn't in Grandma's plans. Because she didn't know about it, he replied. Show them. I pulled up the encrypted files Sophie had helped me access. These are records of transactions between my mother and several shell companies. But look at the dates. They start just weeks after my father's death. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. Are you suggesting your mother was involved in... Morgan! Riker burst into the room, ignoring the agent's protests. We need to talk. Now. This is a federal investigation, Agent Carter started, but I held up my hand. 5 minutes, I said. Riker knows something we need to hear. Once outside, Riker paced the hallway. Your mother didn't just pay me to break up with you. She offered me a position in one of those shell companies. Said it was a special project that needed discretion. Sophie crossed her arms. And you're just mentioning this now? I turned it down, he said quickly. It felt wrong, but I did some digging afterward. Morgan, those companies, they're connected to the accident that killed your father. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. What? Your father was investigating financial irregularities before he died, Grayson added quietly. I found his old files in Grandma's study last week. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. A commotion erupted in the lobby. Through the glass, I saw my mother breaking away from security, running toward us. Morgan, you have no idea what you're doing. Your father... 2 agents intercepted her, but not before she could throw a USB drive at my feet. The truth, she screamed as they dragged her away. It's all there. He gave me no choice. Sophie snatched up the drive before anyone else could move. Give me 2 minutes, she said, pulling out her laptop. We huddled around her as she worked her tech magic. Oh my God, she whispered as files populated her screen. Morgan, these are emails between your mother and... someone called the facilitator. They're discussing your father's removal. The room spun. Grayson grabbed my arm to steady me. She had him killed, I whispered, because he was going to expose her. Agents, Leighton called from the doorway. You need to see this. As the federal agents rushed to examine the new evidence, I felt a buzz from my phone. An email from an account I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my blood freeze. Your grandmother knew. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a video file. My grandmother, recording herself in what looked like her final days. My dearest Morgan, her voice crackled through my phone speaker. If you're watching this, then everything has come to light. But there's one last thing you need to know. Your father left something for you, something your mother never found. Go to the old lake house. In the boathouse, behind the third panel on the east wall. What you find there will complete the puzzle. The lake house. Sophie looked up from her laptop. Isn't that where my father spent his last weekend alive? I finished. We need to go. Now. Grayson already had his car keys out. I'll drive. Wait, Riker called as we turned to leave. I'm coming too. I owe you that much. Sophie packed up her equipment. We should hurry. Once your mother's lawyers get involved, that lake house will be crawling with people. I nodded to the agents, who were deep in discussion with Leighton. This was no longer just about exposing my mother's business fraud. This was about justice for my father. As we rushed toward the parking garage, my phone buzzed again. Another anonymous email, this time with just 4 words. Be careful, trust no one. The night wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The lake house loomed before us, a dark silhouette against the midnight sky. Rain pelted the windshield as Grayson killed the engine, plunging us into silence broken only by distant thunder. Security systems disabled, Sophie announced from the back seat, closing her laptop. We've got 20 minutes before it resets. I still think we should have told the agents, Riker muttered, but followed as we rushed through the rain toward the boathouse. The old structure creaked in the wind, smelling of damp wood and forgotten summers. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, illuminating cobwebs and old fishing gear. Third panel, east wall, Grayson reminded me, already running his hands along the wooden siding. Here, this one's loose. Together we pried it free, revealing a small cavity. Inside sat a waterproof document case, undisturbed for years. Morgan! Sophie's urgent whisper cut through the darkness. Car coming up the drive. Quick, get that case open, Riker urged, peering through a grimy window. My hand shook as I worked the combination lock, my birth date, just as I'd guessed. Inside, I found a USB drive, several folders of documents, and a letter addressed to me in my father's handwriting. Headlights swept across the boathouse walls. We need to move, Grayson hissed. Now. Back door, I whispered, grabbing the case. Through the trees to the guest cottage, we slipped out just as voices approached the boathouse. In the rain-soaked darkness, I caught glimpses of men in suits. Not police, not federal agents. The guest cottage was small but secure, with thick walls that muffled the storm. Sophie immediately connected the USB drive to her laptop while I spread the documents across the dusty coffee table. Your father was thorough, Riker said, scanning the papers. Bank statements, offshore accounts, recorded conversations. Guys, Sophie's voice was tight. These files, they're not just about your mother's fraud. There's a whole network, politicians, judges, business leaders. Your father uncovered a massive conspiracy. Thunder crashed outside as I unfolded my father's letter with trembling fingers. My dearest Morgan, I read aloud. If you're reading this, then I failed to expose the truth, but I trust you'll finish what I started. Your mother isn't working alone. The organization she answers to has infiltrated every level of... A sharp crack split the air. The cottage window exploded inward, sending us diving for cover. Sniper, Grayson shouted. Everyone down. Sophie frantically typed on her laptop. Uploading everything to my secure server. Done. Another shot rang out. Riker grabbed the document case. We need to get out of here. The tunnel, I gasped, remembering childhood adventures. There's a storm tunnel under the cottage, leads to the lake. Morgan, a familiar voice called from outside. We just want to talk. That's impossible, I whispered. That's my mother's brother, Uncle James. He died 3 years ago. Apparently not, Grayson said grimly. Morgan, that tunnel. Where? I led them to the bathroom, pulling up the loose floorboards to reveal a dark passage below. As we dropped down one by one, I heard the cottage door splinter. They're in the tunnel, someone shouted above us. Call the others. We ran through the darkness, our phone lights bouncing off wet concrete walls. The tunnel seemed endless, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. There! Sophie pointed to a maintenance ladder. That has to lead out. I climbed first, pushing against the heavy cover. Rain poured in as we emerged one by one behind a lakeside convenience store. My car's 2 blocks away, Sophie panted. We can make it if... Morgan. Riker's voice stopped me cold. He was staring at his phone. You need to see this. A news alert showed my mother being released from custody, smiling at cameras as her lawyers made statements about false allegations and family misunderstandings. How? I gasped. They had evidence. Look who's standing behind her. Grayson pointed to a figure in the background. Uncle James, very much alive and wearing an FBI badge. This goes higher than we thought, Sophie said, clutching her laptop. Way higher. My phone buzzed. Another anonymous email. Safe house ready. Coordinates attached. Hurry. We can't trust anyone, I realized, thinking of my grandmother's warning. This isn't just about my mother anymore. This is about... Tires screeched at the end of the street. Black SUVs appeared from both directions. Run, Grayson grabbed my arm. Split up, meet at the coordinates. Go. As we scattered into the rain-soaked night, I clutched my father's letter against my chest. Whatever this conspiracy was, whoever was involved, I knew one thing for certain. The truth had cost my father his life, and now it might cost us ours. The safe house turned out to be an abandoned art gallery in the industrial district. I slipped through the back entrance, heart pounding, checking every shadow. Sophie was already inside, her laptop casting a blue glow across her face. Grayson's 2 minutes out, she whispered. No sign of Riker. What have you found? The files are encrypted, but I've cracked the first layer. She turned the screen toward me. Your father was building a case against something called Project Legacy. Look at these names. Judges, senators, CEOs. The door creaked. We both froze until Grayson's familiar whistle signaled all clear. You're bleeding, I noticed as he joined us. Scraped the fence getting away. He pulled out his phone. But I got something. Recorded a conversation between your uncle and someone else while I was hiding. He pressed play. The girl has the files. No, she doesn't understand what she's dealing with. Project Legacy must be protected at all costs. Yes, even if it means... The recording cut off as the gallery's security lights suddenly blazed to life. Footsteps echoed from multiple directions. Up there! Sophie pointed to a catwalk above the main exhibition space. We scrambled up the maintenance ladder, just as the main doors burst open. My mother walked in, flanked by Uncle James and 2 men in tactical gear. She looked different now, harder, colder, nothing like the society maven I'd known. Morgan, she called out, stop this foolishness. You have no idea what you're threatening. She's right. Riker's voice made us all jump. He emerged from the shadows of the catwalk behind us, gun trained steadily. Sorry, Morgan, but this is bigger than your family drama. You were with them all along, I realized. The breakup, the lake house. You were watching me. Project Legacy protects our way of life, he said. Your father didn't understand that. Neither do you. Tell her the truth, Vivienne, a new voice commanded. Leighton stepped into the gallery, but not the Leighton I knew. This one moved with military precision, his lawyer's demeanor gone. My mother's face twisted. She's not ready. I'm right here, I called down, anger overriding fear. Stop talking about me like I'm a child. What is Project Legacy? Power, Leighton answered. Real power, not the illusion of it. Your grandmother built more than a business empire. She built a network that controls everything from judicial appointments to international policy. Your father discovered it and thought he could expose it. He was wrong. And you killed him for it, I spat. We gave him a choice, my mother said. He chose. Poorly. Sophie's fingers flew across her keyboard. Almost done, she whispered. Keep them talking. Why tell me now? I demanded. Because you're meant to take your place in the organization, Uncle James called up. It's your birthright. Your grandmother knew that. Why do you think she left you those breadcrumbs? She was testing you. You're lying, I said, but doubt crept in. Grandma wanted me to expose the truth. The truth? My mother laughed. The truth is that your grandmother ran Project Legacy for 30 years. Everything I did, I learned from her. The fraud, the shell companies, they're all part of a bigger purpose. Got it, Sophie whispered triumphantly. Files decrypted and uploaded. Should hit every major news outlet in 3, 2. Phones began buzzing throughout the gallery. Leighton checked his and cursed. She's broadcast everything. Project Legacy, the names, all of it. Kill them, Uncle James ordered. Kill them all. Gunfire erupted. Grayson tackled me behind a sculpture as bullets sparked off metal. Sophie scrambled toward a fire escape, her laptop clutched to her chest. This way, Riker shouted, but his next words were cut off by an explosion that rocked the building. Through the smoke, I saw figures rappelling through the skylights. Tactical teams in FBI jackets. Federal agents, everyone down. Morgan, my mother screamed as agents surrounded her. You don't understand. We were protecting you. I stood slowly, watching as Uncle James and Leighton were cuffed, as Riker dropped his weapon and surrendered. The gallery filled with federal agents, real ones this time. We'd learned the difference. Miss Morgan, a female agent approached. Agent Sarah Torres, we've been building this case for years. Your father's files were the key we needed. My grandmother, I had to know. Was she really part of it? The agent handed me a final envelope. She left this for you at the bureau to be delivered when Project Legacy fell. Said you'd know when to read it. As dawn broke through the skylights, I looked down at my mother being led away in handcuffs. She'd stopped screaming and now just stared at me with something like pride in her eyes. You really are my daughter, she called out. More than you know. I clutched the envelope, feeling the weight of secrets still unrevealed. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The FBI's safe room felt sterile and cold as I stared at my grandmother's final envelope. Sophie sat beside me, while Grayson paced nervously. Agent Torres watched from the doorway. Whatever's in there, Sophie squeezed my hand. We're with you. I broke the seal and pulled out a single photograph. It showed my grandmother standing in front of the lake house, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a much younger version of Agent Torres. It's time you knew everything, Torres said, closing the door. Your grandmother was never part of Project Legacy. She was part of the task force trying to bring it down. What? I looked at the photo again, but my mother said, Your mother saw what she wanted to see. Elizabeth was our deep cover operative for 20 years. She built her business empire specifically to infiltrate their network. Grayson stopped pacing. That's why she kept all those records. And why she chose Morgan, Sophie realized. She knew they'd try to recruit her next. Torres nodded. Elizabeth's last message to us said she'd left her granddaughter a trail of breadcrumbs. Said you'd know what to do with them. My hands trembled as I found a handwritten note behind the photograph. My dearest Morgan, I read aloud, I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on you, but I knew you had your father's courage and your own fierce heart. Project Legacy tried to corrupt everything they touched, but they couldn't corrupt you. Now, one final task remains. A knock interrupted us. Another agent entered with a laptop. Ma'am, we've got movement at all the designated locations. Torres turned to me. Project Legacy is trying to activate their contingency plan. We've frozen their known accounts, but... There's more, I said, remembering the Lake House documents. Hidden assets, emergency protocols. My father found them all. We need access, Torres urged. Lives are at stake. I looked at Sophie. She nodded and pulled out her laptop. The encryption key. It's in your locket, isn't it? My fingers went to my grandmother's locket. Inside, behind the photo, was a tiny microchip I'd never noticed before. 15 minutes, Sophie said, connecting the chip. That's all I need. Suddenly, the building's lights flickered. Emergency alarms blared. They're here. Torres drew her weapon. Morgan, you and your friends need to... The door burst open. Riker stood there, blood streaming from a head wound, his FBI escort unconscious behind him. Morgan, run! They're coming to tie up loose ends. How did you... Torres began, but gunfire cut her off. The windows exploded inward as black-clad figures repelled into the room. The files, Sophie screamed, shielding her laptop. Almost done. Grayson grabbed a fallen agent's gun, providing cover fire as we scrambled for the emergency exit. Riker joined us, proving his change of heart by taking down 2 attackers. This way. Torres led us through a maze of corridors. We have a panic room in the basement. More explosions rocked the building. Through the chaos, I heard my mother's voice on the building's PA system. Morgan, stop this now. Some secrets need to stay buried. We reached the basement level. Sophie's laptop chimed. Upload complete. Every Project Legacy account, every hidden asset, it's all exposed. Look out, Riker tackled me as a bullet whizzed past. Uncle James appeared at the end of the hallway, his face contorted with rage. The legacy dies with you, he snarled, raising his gun. 3 shots rang out. Uncle James crumpled, revealing my mother standing behind him, smoking gun in her cuffed hands. She'd somehow escaped custody in the chaos. Mom? I stared in disbelief. I won't let them hurt my daughter, she said simply, not like they hurt your father. Torres trained her weapon on my mother. Drop the gun. It's done anyway, my mother smiled sadly. Project Legacy is finished. Your grandmother won, Morgan, just like she planned. More agents flooded the hallway as alerts pinged on everyone's phones. Sophie showed me her screen. Breaking news about mass arrests, exposed conspiracies, a web of corruption unraveling in real time. Elizabeth would be proud, my mother said as agents restrained her again. You're stronger than I ever was. I opened my grandmother's locket one last time. Behind the microchip was one final message, tiny words engraved inside. Truth is the greatest legacy. Morgan, Torres called, we need your statement, but first, your grandmother left something else for you. The deed to the family estate, the legitimate business holdings, everything she protected from Project Legacy. It's all yours now. I looked at my friends. Sophie, still clutching her laptop. Grayson, lowering his borrowed weapon. Even Riker, who'd chosen the right side in the end. Then at my mother, being led away again, her perfectly crafted world finally shattered. What will you do now? Sophie asked softly. I touched the locket, thinking of my grandmother's courage, my father's sacrifice, and my own journey to the truth. I'm going to build something new, I said. Something real. The autumn breeze rustled through the courtyard as workers removed the last Mac Enterprises sign from the building. In its place, a new logo emerged, Legacy Arts Foundation. Your grandmother would love this, Sophie said, watching the transformation from beside me. Using the old corporate headquarters as an arts center. Brilliant. And the board approved the final restructuring this morning, Grayson added, passing me a coffee. The legitimate business holdings will fund arts education for underprivileged kids. My phone buzzed. A message from Agent Torres. Sentencing today. Thought you should know. I showed the text to Sophie and Grayson. I should go. We're coming with you, Sophie said firmly. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. As we approached, I recognized Riker giving a statement. And that's why I'm testifying against Project Legacy. The truth matters more than power. Inside, the courtroom was packed. My mother sat at the defendant's table, impeccably dressed as always. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Pride, regret, or maybe both. All rise, the bailiff called. The judge reviewed the charges: conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice. But then she paused, looking directly at my mother. Before I pass sentence, the defendant may make a final statement. My mother stood, but instead of addressing the judge, she turned to me. Morgan, I spent my life chasing an illusion of power, trying to control everything and everyone around me. I lost sight of what really mattered, the legacy of love your grandmother tried to teach us both. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just finally telling you the truth. The judge sentenced her to 20 years. As they led her away, she stopped briefly beside me. Your father would be proud of what you're building. So would Elizabeth. Outside, Grayson checked his phone. The Foundation's first exhibition opens in an hour. Ready? The gallery space that had once housed corporate trophies now displayed art from young, unknown artists. My own paintings hung among them, not hidden away, but celebrated. Morgan, a familiar voice called. Leighton's daughter Rachel ran up, hugging me tight. After her father's arrest, I'd offered her a position at the Foundation. The first group of scholarship students is here. 30 teenagers filed in, their eyes wide as they took in the art and possibilities surrounding them. One girl stopped in front of my portrait of my grandmother. "Did you paint this?" she asked. "I did. It's my grandmother. The woman who taught me that real power comes from truth and creativity, not control and secrets." "Is that why you started this place?" Another student joined us. "After everything that happened with Project Legacy." "I started this place because art saved me," I explained. "When I felt most trapped by other people's expectations, art showed me who I really was. Now I want to give that same freedom to others." Sophie appeared with a stack of sketchbooks. "First day materials, everyone. Find a spot that inspires you." As the students scattered throughout the gallery, Grayson touched my arm. "Look who's here." Agent Torres stood in the doorway with a small package. "Found this in the evidence lockup. Thought it belonged here." She handed me a weathered sketchbook, my father's old journal, filled with drawings and notes. "Thank you," I whispered, running my fingers over his familiar handwriting. "You've built something remarkable here," Torres said, looking around. "A different kind of legacy." The setting sun streamed through the skylights, casting warm light across the gallery. Students sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching and dreaming. Sophie taught a girl how to blend colors. Grayson hung a sign announcing free art classes for the community. I opened my grandmother's locket, looking at her photo one last time before replacing it with a tiny sketch. 3 generations of women, drawn by my father. Below it, I added my own words: truth, art, freedom. "Miss Morgan," the girl from earlier approached, holding up her sketchbook. "I drew something. Would you look at it?" Her drawing showed a young woman breaking free from chains, surrounded by light and color. In that moment, I saw my own journey reflected in her art. The struggle for truth, the power of creation, the beauty of becoming who you're meant to be. "It's perfect," I told her. "Keep drawing your truth." The gallery hummed with life and possibility. This was my real inheritance, not money or power, but the chance to help others find their voice, their truth, their art. In the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. I looked up at my grandmother's portrait, imagining her smile of approval. The chains of Project Legacy were broken, replaced by the freedom to create, to grow, to be authentic. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, painted in colors of truth and hope.